Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. On Tuesday, I spoke about people with disabilities and the Prophet of Islam. So I spoke about what most Muslims believe as the true version of Islam and disability, the original one. And I got some questions about the Quran, about what people think, etc. And I promised to do this today. And in order to keep my promise, I will speak about the images of people with disabilities in the Islamic tradition. And when I say the Islamic tradition, I don't mean only text. I don't mean only the Quran. I don't mean the biography of the Prophet of Islam, but I mean writings within the Islamic tradition in the broadest sense of the word. What people themselves thought sometimes, what some writers wrote, even if some Muslims would say, but this is the wrong version. This is not authentic, this is not the good thing. So I speak about the Islamic tradition in its totality, bearing in mind and keeping in mind not only the text, not only the scripture, but also what happened around this through the centuries. And my talk today is a sort of afterthought after finishing my book about this. I didn't handle these images this way in my book, but it is based on the research that I have been doing during the process of writing my book. My thesis is that there are 5 main images in the Islamic tradition for people with disabilities. Those who are in this color, many think that it's a positive attitude, and I would say not necessarily, as we will see later. So the first one is that they are blessed, and they form category of holy people. People who have been chosen and selected by God. On the other side, the pariah, outcasted people. The third one, comic figures. Fourth one, help-deserving people, object of charity, etc. And the fifth one, normal people. This is my thesis, that these are the 5 main images that we can come across throughout the history of the Islamic tradition. I can imagine that this can be the case in many other religious traditions as well. We start with the first one, blessed or holy people. In the specifically mystic and Sufi literature in Islam, there is a whole discussion about people who get so close to God at the cost of being close to people. That you take distance from this life, you take distance from people living in this life, and also from the laws that people made for this life. And you come closer and closer to God to the extent that people living in this life and attached to this life will think that you lost your mind. There are so many examples about those people. You will find someone who is so rich, and then he will get rid of all of his money, throw it in the sea, or giving it to poor people. He's living in a palace. He will leave his palace and he will go wandering in the desert, whatever. And there is a literature about this in his very seminal work, the late Michael Dawes, in his book Madman in Medieval Islamic Society. He called it the wise fool. So people think they are insane, but actually they are the wise people, because they understand where they are going to. They are going to God, it will be paradise or hellfire, etc. So they keep this target in mind, and other people are distracted. As we know, being mindful or being perceived as mindful is a social concept. So we look mindful in the eyes of the others, as long as we follow the laws that they think they are the good ones. But if we didn't, then we will be locked upon very strangely, and we may be accused of losing our mind, even if we think this is not the case. So being mindful is preserving your mind on the condition that all the others also preserve their mind. So if we all lost our mind, and there is one person who preserves the mind, this person will be the insane. And the majority will create the rule that this should be the case. This group of people represented a minority in the society. Actually, they are the wise, but from the perspective of the majority, they are the fool. And there is a very wide and big literature throughout the centuries of Islam speaking about those people. And you have titles like Safwat al-Safwa, the elite of the elite. They describe them as this. It's a book of so many volumes speaking about the biographies of those people, how people think about them. And by time they developed the idea that these people are actually the saints. They are so close to God that we, as normal human beings who are not that close, think that these people lost their mind, but actually it's we who lost their mind. So it is the big question, who is here the insane? Who is the person who lost the mind? This was in the first century, the classical period, if we may call it, of Islamic history. By time, it was taken by default that every saint should behave strangely, should behave in a strange way. And it was taken by default, once you are so close to God, people will think that you lost your mind. So it became reversed, especially in the contemporary history now. Those who are diagnosed as people with mental disabilities, intellectual disability, or whatever, these are by default close to God. And that's why they are like this. For instance, the name for a person with mental disability, specifically in North African countries, is called Majdub. And Majdub, as I described it, literally it means someone who has been pulled. And they mean he lost his mental capacities because he has been pulled by God. And he became so close to God that we cannot communicate with this person. So this didn't happen because of a sickness or illness or a specific deviation from the norm. It said, no, it's because he's much closer to God than we, so we cannot understand what those people are doing, saying, etc. So now it is completely the opposite. I remember in our village there was a person with a mental disability, and we were playing together, and we were not allowed to harm the person even with a word, because God will get so angry, because this person is so close to God, and the indication of this closeness is the fact that he has a mental disability. So in the beginning we had the idea that once you get closer to God, you will lose part of your mind in the eyes of the majority who are not that close. And by time it started to be taken by default, all those that we perceive that who are people with mental disabilities, they are saints by default. There is also the literature that spoke about also Michael Doll's the holy fall. So this is one of the images that we come across throughout the Islamic tradition, not only in the classical period, but in the modern time with specific shifts. On the other side, on the other extreme of the issue, it is people who are outcasted and very looked down upon, etc. And this has to do with a literature that appeared in the Islamic history from 4th century Islamic history. So it's something like 10th, 11th century. I don't know if you are all aware with the concept of physiognomy. Physiognomy, it is in Arabic al-firasa. It's simply that you read the inner character of the people on the basis of their physical outlook, of their physical appearance. So like what we see here, and there are books speaking about very minute details about this physical outlook. So for instance, they will say, if you have this nose, it means, for instance, I just speaking like this, you are racist. And if you have this nose, it means you are stupid. And if you have this eye, it means you are a thief, etc. So if you want to understand people, how good, how bad they are, look at their physical appearance and you will understand them. The problem in this pseudoscience, physiognomy, is that there is an ideal physical outlook, how things should look like. And every deviation from this ideal physical outlook, it means that there is something wrong with the soul, with the inner character. So in this general scheme, every type of physical disability, it means that the person is not perfect. It means that there is something wrong. Once there is a physical defect in the body, it means that there is also a parallel or equal spiritual defect in the inner character of the person. And this literature was translated from Greek works done by someone who is very well known in the Arabic literature called Polemon. And his name in the Arabic was Aflimon. The books of Polemon were translated into Arabic around the 10th, 11th century, and they became to be very well known. Some of the quotations, like the one I mentioned here, were very discriminatory as far as people with disabilities are concerned. But this literature became very widespread and very popular in the Islamic history at a specific moment because it had social, political, and economic benefits. Why? For instance, this literature was used among kings, among political leaders, how to choose your close friends, people who will be loyal to you. It's easy, you check the book, who are the good and who are the bad on the basis of physical features, and then you see them, and you choose the people that you like. It's a very easy way to check people around you. Also, it was used for choosing partner for marriage. So they gave a lot of also advices. If you want to get married with a lady who will bring you a lot of children, how can you know this? Yes, by checking the nose, the ears, etc. You can. You want to get married to a husband who will be very obedient to you. He will not make problems. Also, this can be checked. There was a very huge literature about this. Also, those who want to buy slaves, who work very hard, etc., you can do this. Even there was physiognomy for horses. If you want to buy a horse for a race or whatever, what should you do? So this was very, this made this literature very popular, and in it there have been so many problems when it comes to people with disabilities, and this happened also in society to the extent that some kings and political leaders, they ordered that people with disabilities should be moved away from the capital of the city because it's not good to have them around us. This also happened in the history. Also comic figures, that they are became formed part of entertaining and anecdotal literature, adab al-nawadir in Arabic, and depicting people with disabilities as jocular types was very common. There is a literature, a book written by a certain Ibn al-Jawzi, a Muslim historian and religious scholar as well, and I tried to translate the title of the book. The anecdotes of the stupid and gullible people among the jurists Quran exegetes, transmitters of the traditions of the Prophet, Sunnah specialists, poets, and men of letters. And here I have a critical remark about the question of using these people as comic figures, if this was meant by making fun of them that they were locked down. When we read this literature, and specifically this book, we can hardly know if the author is speaking about people with mental or intellectual disabilities as we think of them now. It is a social concept. It is a social concept. A person with a mental disability will never be judged in this case. So it seems that they are making fun of a number of people who give surprising reactions, unexpected reactions, which will make people laugh, irrespective of the fact that they have a disability or not. But anyhow, again, this was also one of the images that we come across in the Islamic tradition. The fourth one is the help-deserving people. They are object of charity. Object of charity. And this image we come across and we see it very clearly in the Islamic legal manuals. When Julia was giving her lecture, I could recognize many of the legal discussions also in the Islamic tradition. We come very close to each other in this regard, especially about the disabilities of women. But what also I came across and I wrote about in my book, disabilities of husbands. This was also mentioned in the literature, but I will not get into these details because they didn't speak about blemishes when it comes to the husband, but other defects. But because you didn't invite me to lecture on sexuology, so I will not speak about this. In Islamic legal manuals, which comes very close to the issue of rabbinic literature, we find that, or at least this how it is perceived among various contemporary writers about people with disabilities in the Islamic tradition, that there were always means to support them financially, whether inside the family or inside the society, as part of the larger society. Inside the family, there is a system which is called maintenance system, financial maintenance system, nafaqa, that everyone inside the family should be supported by the other members of the family. Those who are rich should take care of those who are poor. And contemporary writers, they say people with disabilities were always financially supported by the other members of the family. For instance, if he's a father, he should be supported by the son. If he's the son, he should be supported by the father or brother or sister, whatever. And if the family cannot afford the costs of taking care of this person with disability, then it should be the responsibility of the society within the system of either obligatory charity, which is called zakat, or voluntary charity, which is called sadaqah, or just charity. And in zakat, also many contemporary writers, they said people with disabilities always had a higher priority in receiving the obligatory charity. And here I have also again critical remark. Nowhere in the Islamic legal manuals that we find chapters or sections dedicated to charity directed to people with disabilities alone. Nowhere can we find this. Even we will see later when I speak about the image of normal people, we don't even find the term. A general term only describing people with disabilities. But when Muslim jurists speak about financial support within family, they speak about financial support among family members. It doesn't matter if they have disabilities or if they don't have disabilities. So those who are poor should be financially supported by those who are rich. If it happened that the person with disability was the poor, he should be supported by the rich. But if it happened that he was the rich, he is responsible for taking care of the poor, even if they were not with disabilities and he is with. Nowhere in the Islamic legal manuals we see that they are by default the poor and the others should take care of them. They are just part of the family. They can be on the side of the rich members or they can be on the side of the poor members. Also, when it comes to the society and the obligatory charity, there are 8 categories of people who are entitled to receive zakat or the obligatory charity. None of these 8 categories are people with disabilities. They are not mentioned at all among the 8. And also, the 8 categories are not necessarily all the time the poor people. So, for instance, I'm here in Canada. Imagine that I lost my credit card, my money, etc., and I don't have means. Although I'm very rich. Imagine. I'm not, but imagine. We all know in the academy you can never be rich, but imagine that I'm very rich, but I lost my means here and I don't have access to money. Then I am in Canada, I'm entitled to zakat. So Muslims here around the mosque, they have to support me. Although I'm not originally, I'm not poor, but it happened because I'm on travel, I have problem, they have to support me. Those who are working on collecting zakat, their salary is paid from the revenues of zakat, although they are not poor. So first of all, one of the myths about zakat is that it is only given to those who are poor. Not necessarily. And the second one, that they are always given to people with disabilities, not necessarily. If people with disabilities reach the level of richness from a Islamic legal perspective, they have to pay zakat. And they have to pay zakat for those who deserve the 8 categories, even if they are not with disabilities. So it is, these are general regulations in which people with disabilities will fit in, as those who pay or as those who receive, not necessarily. But of course, because of as I mentioned on Tuesday, because of the deplorable state, the horrible state of people with disabilities in many of the Islamic countries nowadays, this created the image of that people with disabilities are help-deserving people and they are always the object that we need to give them. And even when it comes to charity, when I checked the historical sources, I found that when charity is given to people with disabilities or to people who are among the 8 categories anyhow, it was not meant to keep these people dependent all the time. So there are legal discussions. For instance, there is one person who has to pay zakat. And this zakat is, let's say, $1,000. This $1,000 can be given to 10 persons. Each one will take 100 and can be given to one. What is better? To give it to 10, divide it among 10, or to give it to one person? And the Muslim jurist said, giving it to one will be the better option if this means that this person will not come the next year to receive charity anymore. So if this money will be invested in this person, that he will learn a craft to generate his own or her own income, so next year he will not be poor anymore, he will not be among the 8 categories anymore, then it's better to give it to him. So it was not always in the Islamic legal literature that a charity means giving people who are dependent and who have to remain dependent all the time. The last image is the normal people, and I argue that this is the most authentic one, on the basis of a number of arguments. The first argument is the terminology used to express people with disabilities. The Arabic expression for people with disabilities is a new term, and it has been introduced to Arabic when they were translating UN documents, United Nations documents. But when we look into the sources in the Islamic tradition, whether it is the Quran or what is the statements of the Prophet of Islam or Islamic legal manuals, etc., we don't find any reference to this terminology used today. Not only that we don't find this new terminology, but we don't find any terminology describing people with disabilities as a distinct group. We don't have this term. And it is not only my conclusion, it is the conclusion, for instance, of Vard Trisplar-Chaim, an Israeli scholar who wrote about Islamic law and disability. And it was, for me, it was very striking. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about terminology. And why is this the case? In 2005, I gave a lecture in a summer institute in Budapest. And there was a Canadian professor, and I have to mention his name, Brian Stock. He is professor of English literature here at Toronto University. I didn't meet him since then. I thought it would be possible to do this this time, but it didn't work out. When I gave my lecture about the issue of terminology, and I mentioned the following, that when we go to Islamic theology, for instance, and we look for people with disabilities, where can we find them? We always find them with other groups. So the terminology is speaking about the group where people with disabilities will fit in. We will not find them alone. They will be with others. So for instance, in theology, it will be with everyone whose faith has been tested. So for instance, those who lost their child while they are babies, women who got miscarriage, etc., someone who was very rich and he lost all his money because of a disaster, etc. This is the group, and also people with disabilities, they all fit in, to see how strong their faith is. When we go to Islamic law, we find that people who have a legal excuse to be exempted from specific obligations. And we find people with disabilities within this group, but it's much larger than people with disabilities. For instance, people with disabilities, they can get some concessions when it comes to the obligation of praying. But the same concession I get, for instance, because I'm on travel. I'm here in Canada, so I don't have to pray like the Muslims who are living in Canada, because I am part of people with legal excuse, Ahlul A'zar, like the people with disabilities. So it's just impossible to take people with disabilities alone in any of the sources in the Islamic tradition. When I mentioned this, Brian Stock responded to me and he said, you can quote me by saying this is textual inclusion. This is textual inclusion. That people were integrated on the basis of the text. They were never alone. And that's why the terms were never derogatory for the people, because you cannot use it in a derogatory term because they are not alone. Whenever the term will be derogatory, it will be derogatory for the larger society. And you cannot pinpoint this group in whatever way when it comes to terminology. So this is about the term. So they have been normalized on the basis of the term. Always part of a larger group, always part of the larger society. Also about the scriptures, about the Quran and about the Sunnah. There was a lady who asked me about the Quran last time. Also, again, when it comes to the Quran, the starting point is that there is an equal human dignity given to all humans, irrespective of gender, irrespective of religion even, irrespective of health or sickness, or richness or poverty, married or non-married, whatever. And the Quranic verses speaking about human dignity are very, very broad. Like, and we have honored, we have conferred dignity upon the children of Adam. Anyone who is related to Adam, he is dignified. It doesn't matter who is the person, what is the person. So Muslim exegetes always agreed that people with disabilities fall into this category. They are dignified because they are humans. But they always have the chance to be more dignified than the others. Because the way to be more dignified has always to do with piety, to get closer to God. And as I mentioned with the image of the holy blessed people, it was usually thought that they have more accessibility to the piety and being closer to God than the others. First of all, they are tested when it comes to their faith. They have difficulties that the other people do not have. They stand them, they endure them, etc. So they always have better chances to get closer to God. And the Quranic verse says, verily the most honored among you are the most pious. Not the strongest, not those with physical power or whatever. So they have been normalized on this level that they are part of humanity, they are part of human beings, and they always have the possibility to go further and further, sometimes much more than the others, to get closer to God. Also, as I mentioned in Islamic law, the misconception that it was only help-deserving people and that they are always object of charity. There is a discussion in the Islamic tradition about the employability of people with disabilities. And there is an agreement that the main source of income for people with disabilities is that they work. They have to earn their income as long as they have the possibility to do so. And they base their conclusion on many references in the Quran and Sunnah, but there is a story of one of the companions of the Prophet of Islam who lived during the lifetime of the Prophet of Islam. He was a businessman, merchant, buying and selling goods, and he didn't have a disability. On a moment, he had an accident. His head hit a rock, whatever, and he had a mental disability. According to the description that we have, he had a mental disability. It's not clear how severe, how we can categorize and classify this in modern medical literature. It's not clear, but he had a mental disability which affected his mental capacities. His children said to him, "It's enough. You did hard work, and it's time to take rest now. We will take care of your business." He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to stay at home, and he wanted to continue doing his business. But doing business is a matter of calculation all the time. So the fact that he can make mistakes is there. So they had a disagreement with each other. They went to the Prophet of Islam. How can we solve this? And the solution proposed by the Prophet of Islam was as following. He said to him, as long as you can work, no one can prevent you from working. You do your business, you go on with your work. But this can be at the cost of the financial interest of your children, because people can deceive you in the market. How can we solve this? He made regulation in the market that this person in specific is authorized to do business with people, selling and buying. But once it is proved by his children that this person has been deceived and something was bought to him, something was sold from him at a lower price than the market, then it will be made invalid. And they have the right to turn back the whole transaction. So the contemporary religious scholars, he said this is the state intervention, that the state will intervene in the society in order to create ground and space for people with disabilities. So the fact that this person had a mental disability, it didn't mean that he had to stay at home and he will be object of charity even from his children. As long as there is a possibility to integrate people in society and let them work, then this should be the case. This is also part of the normalizing process. There is also there are also books dedicated to people with different types of disabilities throughout the Islamic history and the achievements they have done throughout Islamic history. One of the famous books, which is now available in print, and many articles in English are written about this book. The author is Ghaly ibn Aybak al-Safadi from the 14th century. He mentioned in this book more than 300 persons who were blind, but they occupied very important positions in the society. Some of them were poets, scholars, physicians, political figures, muazzins, those who made call for prayers, and those skilled in Quranic recitations. They were in almost all aspects of society, so they were there all the time. This literature is now very popular. It comes in print many times in order to inspire contemporary people with disabilities. My final point. I always tell people when I'm in the Netherlands, in the care centers for people with disabilities, use the new one-size-fits-all approach. All the 5 images that I mentioned, as I said, many Muslims would say, no, this is not religion, this is just culture. This is not the Islamic way, this is what people brought from Pakistan and Somalia and Egypt and whatever. This can be fine, and we can always argue about this, but these 5 images do exist. They have always existed in the Islamic tradition. Sometimes some of the images were much more important than the others. Some of the images came to the forefront, others in the background, etc., but they were always there. So it can always happen when you deal with people with disabilities from an Islamic background that you find parents or people with disabilities who would fall into one of these 5. So the imagination that Muslims are just one single block is always a fallacy. That because they are Muslims, then they will behave like this is always a very wrong starting point. There is diversity. There are different images, and these images can be interpreted in always different ways. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. These are the words that I wanted to communicate to you today. Thanks for listening.